Jenna Carlisle, 32 years old, and on my wedding day, my parents stood up in the middle of the ceremony and walked out to teach me a lesson. They wanted everyone to see that I had crossed a line. What most of those 200 guests didn't know was that this wasn't about flowers or seating charts or even marriage. It started weeks earlier when I discovered my name attached to a business loan I had never agreed to guarantee. I filed a formal dispute to protect my own signature, and suddenly, I was the selfish daughter, the ungrateful one, the problem. The morning of my wedding, I understood something quietly devastating. They would rather lose a daughter than lose control. So when they rose from their seats and left me standing at the altar, I didn't chase them. I let them go. What happened next at the reception that evening changed not just my marriage, but the story my family had been telling about me for years. On Saturday, October 18th, 2 front-row seats at my wedding stayed empty, and 200 people saw it. The white roses were already placed on the aisle chairs. The string quartet had just started the first notes of Canon in D. I was standing behind the double doors of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Columbus, Ohio, my hands folded over a bouquet I had paid for myself, waiting for my father to take his place beside me. He never did. Those 2 chairs in the front row still had their name cards: Richard Carlisle, Carol Carlisle, my parents. They had confirmed 3 days earlier that they would be there. Not happily, my mother had said, but they would come. When the music swelled and the doors opened, I walked forward on my own. There is a particular kind of silence that happens when something is wrong in a room full of people. It isn't loud. It's tight. It presses against your ribs. I felt it as I stepped onto the aisle runner, as 200 guests shifted in their seats and pretended not to notice what everyone noticed. My parents had chosen not to come. They said they were teaching me a lesson. That was the phrase my father used when he called me the week before. If you won't respect this family, don't expect us to show up, he told me. We're not going to reward selfishness. I didn't call them that morning. I didn't beg them to reconsider. I didn't delay the ceremony to buy time. I kept my eyes on the altar, where Miles Hanley, my fiancé, my steady patient Miles, stood waiting in his gray suit. I told myself I would not let 2 empty chairs define my wedding day. But they did define something else. Because what my parents didn't understand was that by staying home, they were not controlling me. They were exposing themselves. And when the reception began that evening at the Westin Ballroom downtown, someone stood up and said something that made those 2 empty seats mean more than they ever intended. My name is Jenna Carlisle. I am 30 years old. I work as a project manager at Riverside Methodist Hospital. I believe in contracts, timelines, and showing up when you say you will. On that Saturday in October, my parents decided not to show up. The ceremony continued without interruption. Pastor Green didn't hesitate. The vows were spoken. The rings were exchanged. My Uncle Daniel, my father's older brother, stepped in quietly and signed the marriage license as witness. He squeezed my shoulder, once a wordless gesture that said, "Keep going." We did. When the recessional music played and Miles and I walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, the applause felt louder than it should have. Not joyful exactly, protective. I caught sight of the 2 empty chairs again as we passed. No flowers on them, no programs picked up, just absence sitting in plain view. They thought staying home would punish me. They didn't realize something else had already been set in motion. And by the time the first toast was made that night, the lesson being taught would not be mine. The morning after the wedding, Sunday, October 12th, I woke up in the bridal suite with a dull ache behind my eyes, and the image of those two empty chairs still burned into my mind. Miles was asleep beside me, one arm draped over his forehead, breathing steady. Outside the window, downtown, Columbus was quiet. For a moment, in that soft, early light, I let myself imagine that what happened the day before had been a misunderstanding, a scheduling error, a miscommunication. It wasn't. My parents had not missed my wedding. They had chosen not to come. That choice did not surprise me the way it surprised some of our guests. It fit a pattern I had lived with for years. My father, Richard Carlyle, believes in order, in hierarchy, in the idea that a family functions best when everyone understands their place. My mother, Carol, calls it unity. She prefers softer words, but the outcome has always been the same. Compliance is rewarded. Independence is corrected. Growing up in our house in Upper Arlington, I learned early that love often came attached to expectation. When I was accepted into Ohio State's nursing program at 19, my father nodded once and said, "That's practical." When my younger brother Tyler decided at 22 that he wanted to build something big, my parents refinanced part of their remodeling business to fund his startup idea. Tyler is 27 now. He has tried 3 ventures in 5 years: a custom furniture line, a home staging company, most recently a boutique logistics firm he swears will scale nationally. Each time my parents have stood behind him publicly, at church, at family dinners, at community events. "Jenna is steady," my father would say about me. "She'll always be fine." Fine. It sounds like praise until you realize it's permission to overlook you. When Miles proposed last December at Inniswood Metro Gardens, my first call was to my parents. My mother cried. My father congratulated us and asked about the date. When we told them we were looking at October, he nodded over speakerphone and said, "Fall is good. People show up in the fall." I held on to that sentence. The leather-bound family Bible, the one my father carried down the aisle at both my cousins' weddings, sat on their coffee table when Miles and I went over for dinner in January. My mother touched it and said, "We'll do this right." It felt like approval. It felt like inclusion. Looking back now, I see something else. I see how often doing it right meant doing it their way. In February, when we signed the venue contract for October 11th and paid the deposit ourselves, I sent my parents a copy of the confirmation. My father responded with a thumbs-up emoji. My mother texted, "We'll talk about details soon." We did talk. About guest lists, about seating, about which relatives would expect front row placement. What we didn't talk about, at least not yet, was the cost of saying no. Because in my parents' world, boundaries are interpreted as rejection. And rejection in their eyes requires correction. On Sunday morning, lying there in that hotel bed, I finally allowed myself to admit something I had spent years avoiding. They did not skip my wedding impulsively. They followed through on a lesson they had been teaching me my entire life. And the wedding date had been the first time I refused to absorb it quietly. By Monday, I would understand just how far they were willing to go to make sure I felt it. By Monday morning, October 13th, I was back at my desk at Riverside Methodist Hospital, answering emails like nothing in my life had shifted. Hospitals don't pause because your parents walk out of your wedding. Budgets still need approval. Staffing schedules still need review. I have always been good at compartmentalizing. It's part of my job. At 10:27, my phone buzzed. "Dad." I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was measured. Not angry, not apologetic, controlled. "We need to clear something up," he said. This didn't have to happen. I stared at the spreadsheet on my screen and said nothing. He continued, "You chose your date over your brother's future. There it was again, the language of choice and consequence. As if the date had been impulsive. As if October 11th had not been reserved 18 months in advance. Deposits paid, contracts, signed, invitations mailed. Tyler's future, as my father put it, referred to the launch event for his new logistics company, a weekend showcase for investors and local partners at a renovated warehouse downtown, the same weekend as my wedding. That event had been announced in late July, long after our venue binder, the white one labeled October Wedding, had been finalized and shared with family. You could have moved it, my father said. People reschedule weddings all the time. I looked at the framed copy of our signed venue contract hanging on the bulletin board behind my desk. Miles had insisted we frame the signature page after we booked it. A quiet joke about commitment. It wasn't just a date, I said evenly. It was a contract. Money isn't the point, he replied. Respect is. That word again. Respect in our house had always flowed upward. Before I could respond, he added almost casually, Your mother tried to talk to the venue. They weren't very helpful. I sat up straighter. What do you mean tried to talk to the venue? She was exploring options, he said. If you weren't going to make the mature decision, someone had to. The call ended shortly after. No raised voices, no threats. Just that steady tone, the same one he used with subcontractors who didn't meet deadlines. I stared at my phone long after the line went dead. Your mother tried to talk to the venue. He said it like it was normal, like parents routinely negotiate their adult daughter's wedding contracts without her knowledge. At lunch, I stepped outside into the crisp October air and called Alyssa Grant, our venue coordinator at St. Mark's. She answered on the second ring. Warm, professional, the way she had been since our first tour. I just need to clarify something, I said carefully. Has anyone besides me or Miles contacted you about changes to our contract? There was a pause, paper shuffling on her end. Well, she said slowly, your mother did call in August. She asked about postponement policies. I assumed you knew. My grip tightened around my phone. What exactly did she ask? She wanted to understand the penalties if the event were moved to next year, Alyssa said. I told her any changes would need written authorization from you. Authorization. I thanked her, told her we were not making changes, and hung up. It wasn't sabotage. Not yet. But it was the first concrete thing I could point to. A conversation that had happened without me. A decision being explored on my behalf. That evening, when I told Miles what Alyssa said, he didn't react with outrage. He went quiet. And when Miles goes quiet, it usually means he's thinking 3 steps ahead. I didn't know it then, but that phone call was the first piece of something much larger than a missed ceremony. And by the time I saw the next piece, it wouldn't be about seating charts at all. By Wednesday, October 15th, the word postponement had begun to follow me around like a shadow. I hadn't told anyone outside of Miles about my mother's call to the venue. I went to work. I answered emails. I finalized a quarterly budget review. On the surface, my life looked structured and stable. Underneath, something felt loose. At 9:42 that morning, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. Hi, Jenna. This is Mark Ellison from Ellison Catering. We're handling your reception at the Westin. My stomach tightened. Yes, I said, carefully. I just wanted to confirm something. He continued. We received a voicemail asking about cancellation windows and refund timelines. I wanted to verify whether that was coming from you. The room around me felt smaller. No, I said. It wasn't. There was a pause. I could hear him typing. The caller identified herself as Carol Carlisle, he said gently. She said she was the mother of the bride and needed clarification on the financial exposure if the event were moved to next quarter. Financial exposure. I thanked him for checking and told him nothing was changing. When I hung up, I sat perfectly still in my office chair. 2 vendors, 2 separate inquiries, both asking about penalties, both coming from my mother. It wasn't emotional anymore. It was procedural. That evening, Miles spread the white wedding binder across our kitchen table. The October wedding label stared back at us in thick black marker. Contracts, receipts, seating charts, every deposit highlighted. "They're testing the edges," he said quietly. Of what? Of what they can control. I didn't want to believe that. I wanted this to be about pride, not planning. But the calls kept coming. On Thursday afternoon, our florist, Diane Mueller, who had known my mother through church for years, sent me a short email. "Jenna, I just wanted to make sure you're aware. Your mom asked whether your order could be scaled down if attendance shifted. I told her I would only take direction from you. Scaled down. Attendance shifted." The language was cautious, almost polite, but the message was clear. My parents were preparing for absence, not just their own. That night, I checked the RSVP list again. 200 invitations sent. 192 confirmed yes. 8 regrets due to travel. Nothing unusual. But what if my parents were telling relatives something else? What if the lesson wasn't just about not showing up, but about reshaping the narrative before anyone walked into that church? I didn't call them. Not yet. Instead, I started printing everything. Alyssa's note about the postponement inquiry, Mark's confirmation email, Diane's message about scaling down. I placed them inside a blue accordion file I'd used for tax documents the year before. It felt strange, like I was building a case against my own family. On Friday evening, October 17th, the night before the wedding rehearsal, my father sent a text. "We hope you've reconsidered. There's still time to make this right." No mention of vendors, no acknowledgement of the calls, just that steady tone again. Correction disguised as concern. Miles read the message over my shoulder. "They think pressure will make you fold," he said. For the first time, I felt something sharper than hurt. I felt cornered, not because I doubted my decision, but because I realized how far they were willing to go behind closed doors to enforce theirs. The rehearsal dinner that night was polite, controlled. My parents did not attend. They said they were busy preparing for Tyler's launch weekend. I stood at the front of the church during rehearsal, looking at the aisle where I would walk the next day, and understood something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. This wasn't just disappointment. It was escalation. And if they were willing to pull at contracts and vendors before the ceremony, I had to ask myself what they might do when the room was full. On Monday, October 13th, after Dad's call and Alyssa's confirmation, I thought I had reached the limit of what my parents could take from me. I was wrong. That evening, Miles and I sat at our kitchen table with the blue accordion file open between us, vendor emails on one side, the white wedding binder on the other, evidence of small betrayals laid out like receipts. Miles didn't say much at first. He kept rubbing his thumb along the edge of his phone, the way he does when he's sorting through something he doesn't want to drop on me too fast. "Jenna," he finally said, "I need you to promise you won't panic." I laughed once, short and humorless. "Miles," I walked down the aisle alone. "I'm out of panic." He nodded, then slid his laptop toward me and turned the screen so I could see. A credit monitoring alert, my name at the top, a new inquiry, a balance I didn't recognize. "What am I looking at?" I asked. He swallowed. Your credit file. Something's attached to your social security number that shouldn't be. My mouth went dry. Miles isn't a banker. He's a union electrician who likes clean wiring and clear answers, but he is meticulous. And 2 months before the wedding, he'd insisted we both sign up for credit monitoring because we were about to apply for a mortgage within the next year. It was a practical decision, the kind adults make. This was not practical. This was invasive. He clicked through the report slowly, letting me read each line. A business line of credit. Guarantor, Jenna Carlisle. Account tied to an LLC I recognized immediately. Carlisle Logistics Group. Tyler's company. My vision narrowed. I never signed anything for Tyler. I know, Miles said quietly. That's why I kept digging. He opened another document, a scanned application packet. A signature page with my name printed beneath a looping signature that looked like mine until you looked closer. The angle was wrong. The pressure inconsistent, like someone had practiced it. My hands started to shake, not with fear at first, but with something hotter and steadier. How long, I asked. Miles scrolled. The account had been opened in early spring. Payments had been made for a few months. Then 2 late notices. Not catastrophic yet, but enough to stain my credit if it continued. My parents had not only been pressuring me to move my wedding date for Tyler's launch weekend, they had been tying my name to Tyler's risk while telling me I was selfish for protecting my own plans. I thought about the words my father loved to use. Respect, unity, family. What he meant was obedience. And what my mother meant, by doing it right, was doing it quietly. I stared at the screen until the numbers stopped looking like numbers and started looking like intention. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a fight about a date. This was them using my identity as a tool. Miles reached across the tapis and covered my shaking hand with his. We don't have to do anything tonight, he said. But I need you to understand the stakes. If Tyler defaults, they come after you. I looked at the blue accordion file. The vendor calls, the postponement questions, the behind-the-scenes pressure. Then I looked back at the guarantor line with my name beside it. Something in me went quiet and hard. I'm not calling them, I said. Miles blinked. What? I'm not warning them, I repeated. Because if I warn them, they'll talk. They'll spin it. They'll make it about respect and humiliation again. And I'll end up apologizing for something I didn't do. That was the moment I stopped hoping this would resolve like a family argument. I chose a different path. And once you choose it, you don't get to go back to being their version of a good daughter. On Tuesday morning, October 14th, I didn't go straight to my office. I drove downtown instead. The sky over Columbus was pale and cloudless, the kind of clear autumn morning that makes everything look honest. I parked 2 blocks from the branch office, listed on the credit report, and sat in my car for a full minute before getting out. If I walked inside, this would become real. Not a family misunderstanding, not a tense phone call, not a wedding dispute, a formal record. Miles had offered to come with me, but this was my name, my social security number, my signature copied or forged, attached to a business I had never agreed to guarantee. Inside the bank, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. A young teller greeted me, and I asked to speak with someone about a commercial credit line. I was introduced to a compliance officer named Sandra Patel, a woman in her early 50s with steady eyes and a notepad already open when I sat down. I need to dispute a guarantor listing, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. She listened without interruption as I explained what I'd discovered. I showed her the printed credit alert, the scanned application Miles had found, and a copy of my driver's license for signature comparison. She didn't react dramatically. She asked questions, dates, addresses, whether I had ever authorized anyone to sign on my behalf. No, I said. She nodded once and slid a form across the desk. This initiates a formal fraud review, she explained. The account may be temporarily restricted while we investigate. You'll need to submit a written affidavit. Temporarily restricted. The phrase landed with weight. I signed the dispute paperwork with a pen that felt heavier than it should have. Each stroke deliberate. This was my name, written by me, not interpreted by someone else. When I stepped back outside, the air felt sharper. By noon, my phone was buzzing. Dad. I let it go to voicemail. Then Mom. Then Tyler. 3 calls in less than 15 minutes. I listened to my father's message first. What did you do? He asked. No greeting, no warmth. The bank contacted us. They've frozen part of Tyler's line. If this is about your wedding tantrum, you need to fix it. Wedding tantrum. There it was again. The reframing. The dismissal. I stood in the hospital parking garage, listening to him reduce a documented credit dispute to a fit of emotion. Mom's voicemail was softer, but edged with urgency. Jenna, honey, there must be some misunderstanding. We were protecting you. Families handle these things internally. Call us before this spirals. Protecting me by tying my name to a risk I never approved. Tyler's message was shorter, angrier. You just cost me investor confidence. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, I thought. I do. For the first time since the empty chairs, I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt clear. They were not confused. They were threatened. Not by the wedding, by documentation. That evening, Miles and I sat at the kitchen table again. The blue accordion file had grown thicker. Now it held vendor inquiries and a stamped copy of my fraud affidavit. This changes things, he said quietly. It already has, I replied. I didn't call my parents back that night, because once you move something from conversation to record, you can't pretend it's just hurt feelings anymore. They had tried to correct me with absence. I had responded with paperwork. And for the first time in my life, the lesson was no longer being taught in their voice. By Thursday afternoon, October 16th, the situation had stopped feeling private. At 2:12 p.m., I received a call from Sandra Patel, the compliance officer at the bank. Ms. Carlisle, she said in her steady voice, we've placed a temporary freeze on the Carlisle Logistics Group line of credit pending investigation. All guarantor obligations are under review. You may receive additional documentation requests. Temporary freeze. The words sounded clinical, almost harmless. They were not. Within 20 minutes, my phone lit up again. Tyler, first. You had no right, he snapped before I could speak. Investors are calling. The launch is Saturday. If we can't access the credit line, payroll won't clear. I stood in the hallway, outside a conference room, at the hospital, pressed against cool, cinder block walls, and listened to my younger brother talk about payroll as if I were the one who had forged something. I didn't authorize my name, I said evenly. It's family, he shot back. Dad said you understood. Understood. That word again, as if my silence had been consent. When I hung up, I felt something shift, from defensive to exposed. This wasn't just between me and my parents anymore. Employees, vendors, investors, real people were now caught in the ripple. At 3:30, my father called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. What do you want? He asked, His voice was tight, no longer controlled. "You forced a compliance review," he continued. "Do you have any idea what this does to our reputation? To Tyler's credibility? Our reputation," I repeated. "Yes," he said sharply. "You are attached to this family. When you escalate things outside the house, you embarrass all of us." There it was, the core belief. Problems stay inside. Appearances stay intact. I escalated because my signature was used without permission, I said. "That's not embarrassment. That's documentation." He exhaled loudly. "Withdraw the complaint." The request landed flat and heavy. "Put it back the way it was," he said. "We'll fix the paperwork internally." Internally. As if the past few weeks had not included secret vendor calls and quiet inquiries about penalties. "I can't," I said. Silence on the other end. Then a different tone. "If Tyler loses this launch because of you," he said slowly, "that will be on your conscience." He hung up before I could respond. That evening, Miles found me sitting at the kitchen table, the blue accordion file open again, but this time my hands weren't steady. "What if he's right?" I asked quietly. "What if payroll doesn't clear?" Miles sat across from me and didn't rush his answer. "If payroll doesn't clear," he said, "it's because the credit line wasn't structured honestly. That's not on you." I knew that logically. Emotionally, it felt like I had lit a fuse. By Friday morning, October 17th, the day before Tyler's launch, and the day before my wedding rehearsal dinner, the freeze had already begun circulating among Tyler's partners. A cousin texted, asking what was going on. An aunt left a voicemail, urging me to think about the timing. The timing. As if accountability had to wait its turn behind a family celebration. For the first time since I filed the affidavit, doubt crept in, not about whether I was right, but about whether I was prepared for how messy right could be. I had wanted to protect my name. Now, my name was the headline in conversations I wasn't part of. Miles reached across the table and closed the blue file gently. "This isn't revenge," he said. "It's correction. But correction has consequences." And, as Friday night settled in and my phone continued to buzz with missed calls, I understood something clearly. They weren't going to back down quietly. And whatever happened next would not stay confined to paperwork. Saturday, October 18th, had started before sunrise, and by the time I was fully dressed, I felt like I was moving through someone else's life. The bridal room at St. Mark's smelled like hairspray and warm coffee. My bridesmaids tried to keep their voices light, the way women do when they know the air is fragile. Miles's mother, Linda Hanley, adjusted my veil with careful hands, as if steadiness could be passed from one person to another. My phone stayed face down on the vanity. After Thursday's call from the bank and Friday's storm of messages, I had learned something important about my parents. They weren't interested in resolution. They were interested in control. So I made a decision that felt both small and enormous. I would stop feeding the chaos. No more explanations. No more defending myself in private where they could twist my words. If they wanted a story, they could live with the one their actions created. Before we left for the church, I opened the blue accordion file and slid one more document inside Sandra Patel's stamped acknowledgement that my dispute had been received. Paper-proof, dated, and real. Miles watched me do it. "You don't have to carry that today," he said softly. "I'm not carrying it," I answered. "I'm keeping it." At 3:45, the sanctuary began to fill. I could hear the hum of voices through the closed doors. 200 people had been invited. Not all of them would come, I knew that now. Family drama travels faster than wedding invitations. When the music started, my pulse steadied instead of spiking. It surprised me. I took one breath, then another. The doors opened. I walked forward alone, just as I had in the first minutes of this story. But now I noticed something I hadn't processed. Then my parents were there. Not in the front row, in the back, on the aisle end, together, but slightly apart from everyone else. My father's jaw was set. My mother held a tissue, like a prop. They wanted to be seen choosing absence. The ceremony reached the moment when the room goes quiet, the pause before the vows, the sacred stillness. And that was when my father stood. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice carried because the room had gone so silent. "Jenna," he said, "your mother and I can't support this. You made your choice. Now we're making ours." My mother let out a sound that could have been a sob or could have been performance. She clutched his arm. They turned and walked down the center aisle. I watched them go the way you watch a door close, when you know you can't stop it. For a few heartbeats, everything froze. A cough, a chair creak, the violinist's bow hovering, like it didn't know what to do. Then I felt a hand at my elbow. Uncle Daniel, my father's older brother, a retired CPA with gentle eyes, had stepped forward from the second row. He leaned in just enough that only I could hear him. "Keep going," he whispered. "You're not alone." I looked at Miles at the altar. He didn't look shocked. He looked resolved. Pastor Green cleared his throat and continued, voice steady. The words of the ceremony moved forward like a river finding its course again. I said my vows without looking at the back row. Miles's hands were warm around mine. When we kissed and the room finally exhaled, the applause that followed wasn't polite. It was protective, the way it had been when we walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. On the way out, I saw it again, the two empty front row chairs, still waiting for people who had chosen spectacle over family. Outside, the October air hit my cheeks like cold water. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, because I understood with a calm I hadn't had before that what happened in that aisle was not the end of their lesson. It was the setup, and the reception was next. By the time we arrived at the Westin downtown, it was already dark, and the city lights made the lobby feel too bright, too clean, like a place where people come to celebrate without thinking about consequences. I remember the first thing I saw when the ballroom doors opened, table linens the color of cream candles, flickering in glass cylinders, and the parents' table set near the front with two empty place cards that looked almost identical to the ones at the church. Richard Carlisle, Carol Carlisle. Miles squeezed my hand once as we walked in. "Do you want to change anything?" he asked quietly. I knew what he meant. Not flowers or seating. The plan. I looked at the blue accordion file tucked inside my tote bag and felt its weight against my hip, steady as a heartbeat. "No," I said. "We stick to what's true." Cocktail hour blurred. People hugged me harder than usual. Older relatives, women with soft hands and careful voices, kept saying, "Honey, I'm so sorry," as if apology could fill two empty seats. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. I did not tell anyone what I knew. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, because I had learned something important about truth. In families like mine, if you release it too early, it gets diluted into gossip. If you release it with documentation, it becomes reality. Dinner was served. The band played. Miles and I danced for 3 minutes, like we could borrow normalcy if we moved in time with the music. Then came the toasts. The best man went first. A sweet story about Miles pulling wire in freezing weather and still showing up to coach his nephew's Little League game. The room laughed in the places it was supposed to laugh. People needed that. Then my maid of honor spoke, voice trembling, and the room quieted again. I kept watching the clock above the bar. At 8:15, the DJ cleared his throat and said there was one more message. Uncle Daniel stood. My father's older brother had changed out of his suit jacket and loosened his tie, but he still held himself like a man who had signed tax returns for 40 years and understood exactly what paper means. He walked to the microphone slowly, not performing, just moving with purpose. I'm not here to embarrass anyone, he said at the start, voice calm. I'm here because something happened that needs to be understood correctly. A hush fell over the room. Even the kitchen noise seemed to fade. Uncle Daniel placed a manila envelope on the edge of the DJ table and looked out at the guests. Many of you saw Richard and Carol leave the ceremony today, he said. You may have been told this was about Jenna being selfish. He paused, letting the word hang. I want you to know, he continued, this is not about a date. This is about a name being used without permission. My stomach tightened, even though I knew what was coming. Knowing doesn't make it easier when 200 people are listening. He reached into the envelope and lifted a single sheet of paper. This, he said, is the bank's written acknowledgement dated Tuesday that an affidavit was filed disputing a guarantor signature on Carlisle Logistics Group's line of credit. A few sharp inhales. He didn't wave the paper around. He held it steady, like it deserved respect. Jenna did not sign to guarantee her brother's business, Uncle Daniel said. Her name was put there anyway. A low murmur moved through the tables. Confusion, then understanding, like a tide turning. He set the paper down and opened his palm toward me and Miles. She didn't do this to hurt anyone, he said. She did it because a grown woman has the right to protect her own identity. The compliance review is not punishment. It is consequence. He glanced at the empty place cards at the parents' table and didn't say their names again. That's all he said. If anyone needs clarification, I'm happy to speak after. He stepped back. For a moment, the room held its breath. And then, like a match finding dry kindling, the reactions started, chairs, scraping, whispers, turning into urgent side conversations. People pulling out phones, not to film, but to text someone they couldn't believe they had trusted. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exposed. But when I looked at Miles, his face was calm. And in his calm, I understood the deepest shift of the night. My parents had tried to make my wedding a lesson. Instead, the reception had become a record. And once something becomes a record, it doesn't disappear just because the people who caused it refused to sit in the front row. Monday, October 13th, was quiet in a way that almost felt unnatural. No band, no candles, no murmuring guests, leaning in to catch fragments of truth. Just the hum of the refrigerator in our apartment and the soft glow of morning light across the kitchen table. The blue accordion file sat between Miles and me, thicker than it had been a week ago. At 9:30 a.m., Sandra Patel called again. The review is complete, she said. Your guarantor status has been formally removed. The affidavit stands. The account has been restructured internally. Restructured. Not erased, not denied, corrected. I thanked her, hung up, and let the silence settle. By 11, Tyler had called 3 times. I didn't answer. His voicemail was shorter than the others had been. We had to delay the launch, he said. Investors demanded revised documentation. Dad's furious. I believed that part. At 2 in the afternoon, an email arrived from a law firm. I recognized one my father had used for years in business acquisitions. The subject line read, Notice of Internal Audit. It was brief and clinical. Due to recent compliance concerns, Carlyle Logistics Group had initiated an independent audit of all credit structures and guarantor agreements. Independent. That word meant my father could no longer contain the narrative inside family walls. Consequences had moved from personal to procedural. Later that evening, Uncle Daniel called. It's done the right way now, he said. Tyler's investors insisted. Richard didn't have much choice. He didn't sound pleased. He sounded tired. I sat with that. No victory music played in my head. No sense of triumph washed over me. Just a steady awareness that something had shifted permanently. My parents had tried to teach me a lesson by walking out of my wedding. Instead, they had triggered scrutiny they could not control. The next morning, Tuesday, October 14th, I received a certified letter at the hospital's administrative office. The return address was my parents' home. Inside was a single page. No theatrics, no justifications. We regret that our actions escalated a private matter into a public one. We acknowledge that Jenna did not authorize the guarantor agreement and that steps have been taken to correct the documentation. No apology for the aisle, no apology for the empty chairs, just acknowledgement. It was enough, not because it healed everything, because it marked the end of denial. That night, Miles and I drove past St. Mark's on our way home from dinner with his parents. The building was dark now, ordinary again. I realized something as we stopped at the light. The most painful part of that day hadn't been their leaving. It had been the years I spent believing I needed their approval to stand upright. The aisle had simply revealed what was already true. I had walked forward alone, and I had not fallen. Back in our apartment, I slid the blue accordion file onto the highest shelf of our hallway closet, not as a trophy, as a record. Miles came up behind me and rested his chin on my shoulder. Are you okay? He asked. I am, I said. And for the first time, it wasn't defiance. It was calm. Justice didn't look like revenge. It looked like corrected paperwork, delayed launches, and an audit signed by people who once believed they were untouchable. Healing didn't look like reconciliation. It looked like boundaries that held. If you've ever had to choose between protecting your family's image and protecting your own name, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Share your thoughts below. And if stories about justice and hard-earned healing matter to you, stay with us for the next one.